So now I'm going to give the floor to another great leader from the FDA, Dr. Peter Marks. He leads CBER, and I want to also highlight how Dr. Marks' vision has led to an expanded set of collaborations with CPATH and with you, the patient groups, industry, academics, focusing on one specific disease that poses a series of challenges. And he's going to share some of those perspectives with us. So, Peter, you're welcome to join us at the stage. Thank you.
So thanks very much. Thanks for being here today. And it's hard to follow, Janet, but I'll do my best. I'm going to concentrate on a couple of topics and say a few words about advancing therapies. We're in our center, we handle cell and gene therapies, and some of the more complicated products, and some very leading edge products now starting to see the genome editing really come into the clinic. That includes genome edited cell-based therapeutics, as well as now even directly administered genome editing products being considered for use in people. And as we think about that, all those really exciting products, we still have to think about how we're going to bring things through development as quickly as possible. And that's because right now, if we don't help things come through development quickly or reasonably in a straightforward manner, they're not likely to make it. And I'll say a few more words about that. So I'm going to say a little bit about the importance of biomarkers and accelerated approval. Talk a little bit about the use of real-world evidence out back versus up front. Talk a little bit about what I'll call ecosystem management, which is actually was already mentioned, which is maintaining communication with both patient groups, industry, advocacy organizations. But I'm going to start before I say all of that, which is that everything I say today, it hinges on something that may not be our focus here, but in this area of cell and gene therapies, we're very interested in our center of concentrating on manufacturing as a very important aspect, because unless we're able to reduce the cost of production of these products, they will never be widely used globally. The cost right now of the products, now the truth is, right, the cost doesn't necessarily, the cost that the list price of these products doesn't reflect the actual cost of production. But the truth is still, for cell and gene therapies, the cost of production relative to small molecule drugs and even conventional protein therapeutics is very high. So what are we going to do to try to help things along here? Obviously, we'll leave manufacturing for now. Over the past years, we've seen initially a tremendous interest come into this area of cell and gene therapy, and right now we're kind of in a lull. Unfortunately, people may have read about the fact that there are gene therapy companies laying people off, in part because people realize that drug development takes some time. And our job, I think, not just for the companies, but even more so for the patients in need, is to try to help move that process forward. And in the area of cell and gene therapy for small populations, the only way I can actually see to do that is to leverage all of the tools at our disposal. And so accelerated approval, which for some is a dirty word when it applies to larger populations, for small populations may be really a saving grace, right? It's for some of the, we've already mentioned, it's potentially true for lysosomal storage disorders. It's potentially true for alpha-1 antitrypsin deficiency. The only way we're going to get there is by using biomarkers or intermediate clinical endpoints. And so our center is very much focused on looking at how we can best use these. I think you'll see us in the coming months announce workshops on specific biomarker tools that may be useful in certain settings, because we're interested in trying to reproducibly measure them and then reproducibly apply them so that we can use these to move development forward. For gene therapies, it makes a lot of sense because oftentimes for gene therapies, we know what's missing or what there's too much of. And if you can measure that, right, you can use an animal system or a natural human experiment, correlate what levels are associated with normal function. And that may not be what is the normal level. In other words, we can often, for many proteins, we can get away with 5% of normal. But if we can reach that level with a gene therapy, we can have what will be a normal individual and essentially treat or cure disease. And so that type of bootstrapping is how we can use accelerated approval to bring some of these gene therapies along. Ultimately, obviously, getting confirmatory evidence with a clinical endpoint on how someone feels, functions, or survives. How will we get some of that longer-term evidence? My guess is we'll do some of it with real-world evidence. I don't know that we're going to use real-world evidence upfront, because these are gene therapies. You're going to have informed consent. They're going to be studied on trials. On the other hand, out back, real-world evidence may make a lot of sense, particularly as we start to think about genome-edited products, where we're going to be wanting to follow people for a long time, longer than most of us have attention spans. And so since we'll want to look 10, 15 years out to see, did this therapy continue to work, I think we're going to have to get used to real world evidence. And I suspect that we're going to start to have discussions about collaboratives to aggregate different diseases so that it's not, to just have one database to follow 40 people and another one to follow a different 40 people. That's not going to be very efficient. So my guess is we'll see some work together. And to be honest, since many of these gene therapies use the same backbone platform, actually aggregating people into one database using real-world evidence may actually allow you to make some inference about the vectors themselves. I mentioned ecosystem management. What I mean by that is that it's really critical that we keep interest in the various parts of that ecosystem. And I think central to it has to be the patient, right? But around that are advocacy organizations who want to benefit the patient, and industry that wants to help the patient, but obviously also has the motive of trying to make a profit in the process of doing so. The only way, though, that we'll keep that industry interest is if we help generate regulatory certainty. The surest thing that will get us out of kilter is regulatory uncertainty. And I think it's really important to continue to think about how we can engage industry, because as much as I believe that academic manufacturing can fulfill some of the needs here, ultimately, if we're going to deal with 7,000 rare diseases, it's going to have to be based on having a robust commercial environment. And so some of the things that we're trying to do with this is to improve communication all around. Obviously, improve communication with patients, stakeholder groups, and with industry. And to that, the last of those, we're trying to also leverage what we learned during the pandemic. And the thing that we did learn from developing vaccines very rapidly, aside from knowing that, if you have a lot of money and you can manufacture at risk, that's a good thing, is that constant communication during product development can really speed things up. And during the vaccine development process, something I had the opportunity to be closely involved with instead of having our usual type ABC meetings, which take from 30 to 75 days to get scheduled, plus all of the back and forth that goes around them, we just use email and telephonic communications or Zoom. We actually reduced probably about 25 to 50% of the reduction in development time came from doing that. That was pretty significant because, just so everyone, in case anyone doesn't know, the original timeline for a vaccine from various companies was about 2 years, and it was shortened to less than half of that. And I'd say that at least a quarter to a half of that shortening was just by this communication. Now, what does that tell us? It tells us that perhaps if we applied that in other places, we could make similar gains in getting things across the finish line. And if you look at case studies with FDA interacting with small companies, I think it's a pretty good guess that we could make some headway. Why? Because when I look at case studies where we've had companies in FDA, especially small companies, go back and forth for about half a year trying to get alignment on something, where if they would have had a live conversation back and forth over the course of a week, they would have gotten there. I think it could make a difference. So we are doing, in conjunction with CEDAR, we have the START pilot, which is basically an early, it is to take products that are not fully, they're not ready for submission yet, but they're far enough along that they're in the clinic, to help see if we can bring them along by having frequent communications as they're developed. That pilot, which won't have a lot of products in the initial pilot, there's an FR notice that was published on September 29th asking for applications for candidates. We'll look to see if giving that type of essentially communication advice makes a difference. If it works, great. We'll potentially try to expand it. If it doesn't, well, we gave it a try. But hopefully we'll see one way or the other and be able to move forward. So I'm going to kind of conclude by saying that, we have a lot that we can be doing here. I think we do now have to make progress accelerate, because there are a lot of rare diseases. And if we go at the rate we're currently going, one by one, it's going to take a little bit too long for many patients to get there. So if we can accelerate progress, it will make a big difference. And since we do have some global regulators on the line, I think that one of the other things that I'll just mention in closing is that everything else that I talked about here will be amplified if we can come to better global regulatory convergence, so that there's less rework necessary, especially for rare populations. It may also help drive people, drive companies into this area. So thanks very much, and I'll look forward to the dialogue today. Thank you.